So, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for attending today's webinar on in-house mediation programs and whether this may work for your environment. So I've said before that we're recording this, but we will be doing about a 30-minute webinar, stopping the recording and then open it up for any questions after that. But what we're going to do is just start off by introducing ourselves. So first of all, hi, I'm Azanne Keenan. I'm a workplace mediator. It is my day job on LK Mediation Services. Historically, I'm a HR professional and I've been doing that for over 25 years, and then decided that actually I preferred mediating and resolving conflict in a much more constructive way than going down formal processes. Over to you, Sarah.
Yes, welcome everyone. So my first career was as a criminal prosecutor. So I spent a couple of decades in public sector as a criminal prosecutor, and quite quickly went up the management route. And the last part of my career was running a mediation unit in the southwest. But whilst I was doing that, got the chance to train as an in-house mediator. More about that in a minute. And I decided, after a couple of years of running my unit and doing a bit of in-house mediation, that I liked the latter much more than the former. So I gave up the law and set myself up as an independent workplace mediator. And yeah, it's been doing that a long time now. I think this is my 17th year of my business now.
Thank you, Sarah. So just to give you a little bit of an introduction as to why we are doing these webinars, this is our third one now, and we want to just share our experience and expertise with people within the profession and in the HR profession and line managers. We want to support them in dealing with conflict that can't always see a way forward. And if we can help them take a step back and think differently and give you those light bulb moments on what to do and the next steps you could take, then we've done what we've set out to do, because we care about what we do. Why Sarah and I work together? We are two businesses that work closely together. We've worked together for several years, and Sarah actually trained me back in the early days. Our professional backgrounds, as you hear, are very different, and our behavioural styles are very different. One is very creative and one is very detailed. And I'm sure Laura will give a little chuckle to that, because Laura has recently attended one of our programmes. That contrast really works. It enables us to challenge one another, build on each other's strengths and thinking, and bring a balanced, complex to our complex discussions. And we find that when we come to doing team conflicts and do co-mediation, that we really are able to bounce off one another. What Sarah and I do, through our own businesses, we deliver two-party mediations. Together, we deal with group and multi-party mediations. We train new mediators. We deliver skills to line managers that want mediation skills, conflict coaching, behavioural profiling, and we do that through grounded practical experience, professional standards, and we actually love what we do working with organisations.
So let's get into the topic then and think about, okay, what might be the benefits of an in-house mediation service? And as I said, I can speak from personal experience here because I was an in-house mediator for about 3 years. I think probably all of us would agree that formal processes, although sometimes obviously are the only way forward, so often they actually make things worse rather than better. And often what we're talking about when we're thinking of using an in-house mediation service is workplace disputes or unacceptable behaviours from staff, which what we're trying to do is just sort those out at an early stage and stop them from either festering or growing into something bigger. I think the change here from an in-house service or any form of mediation service is that you're looking at it from a perspective of you believe the parties can sort out to a large extent what's happening between them, and it's more a case as the mediator's there just to facilitate and help that process. What we're not doing with mediation, of course, is imposing a solution. So if you think about the obvious benefits, perhaps, and these would be benefits, of course, whether you were using mediation in-house or whether it was an external provider. First and foremost, speed. For those of you who've done investigations, I'm sure you all appreciate how long that can take just to get started. And most mediations can be done, finished, parties moved on, before you've even found your investigator. The de-escalation of conflict quickly makes all the difference. So if you're getting in there early, the chances are that people will sort it out before it really becomes quite entrenched. And of course all of that just reduces so many costs. Think about the amount of time and resource that is spent on conflict. A bit more about that in a minute from Lisanne. Think about the stress that it causes to employees and the sickness and resignations that follow. And I think for me the key thing is that you are putting the responsibility and the accountability for sorting out what has happened and moving it forward with the parties. So they're much more likely to want to do it if they feel that they own it. So I just want to share with you then in the next slide what happened at CPS when we introduced it. So it was some time back, it was back in 2007, and CPS was probably ahead of the curve then because workplace mediation was not used or indeed known as it is now. But what we were seeing, that first half of the graph, is that our grievances were just going up and up. I mean, this was a period of time where we were having an awful lot of change taking place, and staff really were, digging in, falling out with each other, complaining about how they were being managed, etc., etc. So the grievances were going up. Obviously, that was taking time and resource. And we were looking at what do we do. So that dotted line represents 2007 when we introduced the scheme. And the mediations started to take off, and there was a real clear correlation between grievances coming down as that went on. I would say that second side of the graph represents a 12 to 18 month period, because it definitely took time for the mediations to build up and for the grievances to come down. So just coming back to the benefits then, just give you a moment, look at those, just really think about whether any of those particularly resonate for you.
I'm sure that a couple of those will certainly resonate with everybody within the room. Okay, so we're now going to move on to what the costs of conflict are currently impacting the business at the moment. And these are the most up-to-date stats that we can find, which have been released by ACAS in 2021. A staggering £28.8 billion is costing organisations in conflicts alone, down from small cases to more complex cases. That's averaging about £1,000 per employee, which is an incredible amount of money. 900,000 people have taken time off work, and that will be stress or anxiety related. 500,000 resignations where they just can't see a way out, and some of that may have led to constructual dismissal. 300,000 dismissals, and 10 million experienced conflict at work. Half of these have reported stress as a result. So I want to break that down a little bit further. So here is a table that was produced as an example. Typical costs have been made on assumptions provided by the CIPD. But if you think about a basic grievance that quite complex comes into the business, you break down the time that a manager has spent receiving the grievance and processing it, organising the meetings, the senior managers then interviewing, the two parties involved being investigated, the line manager being investigated, and anyone else within that team also being investigated. And if you base that on an average salary, you're looking at about £11,000 just in investigation time that you don't technically write a cheque for, so you don't see that money going out, but that's time on the organisation that is not being done doing the job that they're employed to do. Then factor in the sick absence, the legal advice that you may have to seek. You may have to look at replacement recruitment if they've left due to constructive dismissal. And then all the external legal costs, if you're having to go to tribunal or there's a settlement agreement that's been involved, it can be a staggering £33,000. But let me share a real life example with you. The East Sussex County Council were looking at doing an in-house programme. The reason is they employed 17,000 employees over 500 locations within a population that they served as 700,000 people. When they look back at how many grievance cases they were dealing with and how much per grievance case it was equating to, which was £18,000, it gave them a good case of why they should be launching an in-house programme into their council. I'm wondering how much in your organisation you are paying per grievance and really realise that's the amount it's equating to.
Okay, so if you're not persuaded on the numbers, that's one part of it. The next, probably, this is a real challenge for some organisations, is that you'll need a cultural shift to have an in-person, an in-house mediation service. So all organisations start from the place of conflict is going to occur. I think the challenge is, how do we best deal with it? And it depends really where your starting point is as to how much of a shift you're going to need. But for many organisations, their approach to conflict is entrenched, and it's supported by ACAS, who over many, many years encouraged a very formal approach, grievances and performance, and a formal process to address these. So if that is the mentality in your organisation, that's what we've always done, that shift that you've got to achieve is greater. However, having said that, I do think in the last decade, and particularly in the last 5 years, we are seeing the shift. We are seeing the shift to that just doesn't work and there are better ways. So you may already be pushing at an open door. I was thinking about who's perhaps doing this very well, and I do quite a lot of work with the NHS, and I don't know if you've heard of it, but they have what they call a just and learning culture in the NHS. So yes, they recognise they are going to have issues, staff are going to make mistakes, things are going to go wrong, and all of that will impact patients. But what they do about it is approach it as a starting point, as a learning exercise, so that when things go wrong, their focus first is on support, care, and understanding for everyone involved. But I want to be really clear, they don't allow staff to not take responsibility for their actions. Quite the opposite, actually. What I've seen with working either in mediation or more recently quite a lot of facilitated conversations in the NHS is they are much more likely to take responsibility when it is approached in a way that does not feel that they're being attacked, and it is approached as a learning experience. I think the other thing to think about here is if you train in-house mediators, they in turn can help with that cultural shift, because of course you're developing them, but they can be your biggest promoters of the service, and they can also model the behaviours that you might want to see. So that's what you need to do. Let's get into then whether it might be right for the organisations you work in or with, and then look at a case study.
Thanks, Sarah. So
We're not there yet.
let's look at the differences between an in-house mediator and an external mediator. So Sarah and I are both external mediators. So when we go into organisations, the likelihood of us knowing the difference between, knowing that any background to the organisation is going to be slim, or any knowledge about the dispute, which can have its benefits and make sure that we remain impartial and unbiased in those cases. The volume of cases that we deal with are going to be a lot higher. Therefore, our experience of dealing with complex cases is going to be a lot more significant, and we're able to probe into issues more quickly. We are going to be seen more readily as independent and able to gain the trust of the parties more quickly, particularly when it involves senior parties. Our charges are going to be larger, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail in the next slide. And we're able to provide feedback on any common traits that are being picked up on that we can feedback without breaching confidentiality. Internal mediators do know the organisation, so they're likely to understand the language and the acronyms that are used and the culture within the organisation. The costs are going to be significantly less. And again, we'll go into that in more detail in the next slide, but there are no external costs to using an in-house mediator, apart from, obviously, the training. The downside is that some parties may see that there's lack of impartiality, and some organisations get around that, particularly when they are bigger organisations, by drafting in a mediator from another site and or a different department that has no prior knowledge of the parties involved. And their experience may be slightly less. The average mediation an in-house mediator will do is between 1 and 3 a year. So if we were to look at it in a cost perspective, an external mediator on average is between £1,100 to £2,500. That varies depending on level of experience of the mediator and the organisation you engage with and how many parties, but this is based on a 2-party mediation on 10 hours. If you look at a mediator in-house that was earning £40,000 a year, based again on 2 hours, you're looking at £300 to £350. So there's a huge difference in the savings that a business can make.
Okay, so thinking then, is this right for you? I mean, there's obviously a number of questions you're going to need to ask. I think the first one is, how big is your organisation? Because you need to be of a certain size in order to ensure that the mediators are sufficiently impartial and seen as sufficiently impartial to mediate within the company. Comparing that to CPS, we had about 8,000 employees at the time, and we did employ 3 tranches of 12 mediators a time. So I think we had a pool of 36 when we set up. Then there's the question, okay, what sort of conflict and other issues do you think you would use mediation for? And I think the obvious things are you're going to see interpersonal disputes, relationship breakdowns. You more and more, Lisanne and I see hybrid work intentions. There's obviously challenges around diversity, stress-related behaviours. We've got the ERA, Employment Rights Act, coming down the line, haven't we? And again, we're not quite sure what we're going to get out of that in terms of conflict issues. But all of these are potentially suitable for mediation. Another question then is, okay, what sort of conflicts do you have, but also how much time and effort are you losing to resolving those or addressing them? And it's not only obviously HR time, but managers get called into this, don't they, on a day-to-day basis. So if you can think about those things, you then want to think about, well, how many mediators might I want? And then you might want to think about, okay, how are we going to manage this system? How are we going to monitor success? What is this going to look like? And we're going to come back to that in a moment. And also I'm going to talk it through in the case study. I think a key point to make is you can have a hybrid system here. If you have an in-house service, it doesn't mean you can never use an external. And likewise, you could train a couple of in-house mediators and really just have a balance between the two. But let's just look then at a case study where they very successfully implemented an in-house service. So this is the University of East London. You might think, what is that picture there? Well, actually, as a result of all the work I've done with them, they did make me a law fellow quite recently. So that's me up on the wall as a law fellow in the university. But my work with them actually started back in 2016. Two of the law lecturers approached me and they were saying they were just interested in finding out more about mediation and whether they should be bringing that into the law degrees they were offering. So they joined me on an external mediation programme and trained themselves. And then over the next 3 or 4 years, more and more of the lecturers did the same. Not only now from the law faculty, but from the HR and business faculty as well. So I think I trained, about 10 to 12 people within the university. And as they got trained, they then started to use their skills within the university, mediating conflicts as and when they arose. But they did use the hybrid approach, and they would contact me and call me in to mediate on occasions. Sometimes it was team or group conflict. Sometimes it was just had a complexity or a sensitivity that they wanted an external mediator for. And sometimes it was a conflict of interest because they actually knew the people involved and felt none of them was sufficiently impartial. What they did early on was appoint somebody to lead on the mediation service. So this was actually Nina. And so she coordinated everything. She put the parties and the mediator together. She kept a check on how often mediation was being used, how successful it was. She organised the follow-up training, etc., and was putting people on training. They developed a real community feel around the internal mediators. We had some quite regular CPD sessions. These included looking at using the mediation skills for facilitated conversations, and we also looked at using them in conflict coaching. And they could bring things to those sessions and we could talk through challenges as and when they arose. We also then created a video with a couple of professional actors who I mediated, and we condensed that down to a video which is up on their website. So if members of staff are looking at their policies, thinking I've got a dispute or I think I want to raise a grievance, this video helps them to understand what mediation might look like. So again, a really good resource and a very practical one in terms of getting that message across of what it actually is. Having started their mediating internally, they then decided that they would work collaboratively with some other universities in a nearby geographical area who had also trained some internal mediators. And so now, working with them, they would mediate for each other. So if there was potentially a conflict of interest or they wanted to be seen as more impartial, they mediated for each other without additional cost, but on a pro rata basis. And that, worked really successfully for them. Their next step was to start teaching students to mediate. And initially that was done through me, and I would go and train groups of students. But now the university is able to deliver its own mediation training. And that's, again, that's fairly recent, but again, a very successful progress step. They focus not only on workplace mediation in terms of their training, they look across at all sorts of mediation. And last thing to say is they've now set up a centre for mediation and conflict management. It's quite a well-known centre now. It brings together research, it brings together people across the dispute resolution community. We meet fairly regularly, we have guest speakers, and they're celebrating 5 years of having that up and running next month. So it's going to be a nice party to go to next month. So that, that's one example. And I think with UEL, they've obviously taken this in all sorts of directions. But having said that, I have set up internal schemes across many organisations now, and they haven't all been as elaborate as that, but what they have done is created something much more like I did at CPS, where you've got a group of mediators who mediate within the organisation, and they just grow that as a service, but also as an expectation that staff should be thinking of an informal approach first. Enough from me. Back to you, Lizanne.
So you've heard examples of how previous and other organisations have done it, but what about how you might implement a scheme for yourself? So I'm just going to fly through this because I'm conscious of time. We're going to provide you with a board paper, a template board paper that you could present to your senior leadership team today. And that's getting you to think about, what is conflict costing you right at this moment? Can you put a business case together to demonstrate how much of a saving you could make for your business? But once you've done that, you also need to think about who in your organisation would be good to mediate, so that you've got different levels of experience. When would you use mediation? Would you revisit your policies to make it more of a dispute resolution policy rather than a grievance policy, to introduce another tier before going into a more formal process? How would you sell it to the rest of the staff within the business? And would you have somebody like Sarah's explained who would manage the scheme and would be a central point of contact? What would that training look like? Would you bring in a provider like Sarah and I to deliver that training? And then once that training takes place, because of the frequency of how many times they may mediate, they may need additional supervision or CPD further down the line. And then how would you manage your success? How would you measure that? And Sarah, right at the beginning, demonstrated that they measured their success where they saw the increases of mediation cases that were being introduced and the decreases of grievance cases. And what is the time frame that you think that you would realistically see these results? And we're really, very recently working with an organisation where we are delivering this very same impact practice to a manufacturing company next month, where Sarah and I have supported them over the last year to put this case together. And we're delivering the in house training next month. And then we're going to be supporting them with CPD and supervision over the coming years. So this is the ball paper that you will receive, and you'll get that in an email along with the recording for today. Sarah, do you want to cover some of the training briefly?
Yeah, let's come back to that because if you are thinking you want to take this forward, there are, obviously a number of options. I mean, all the training that I deliver and with Lisanne is accredited by the College of Mediators and it is awarded by OCN London. So it's got the backing of two very well recognised bodies. It is Ofqual registered as well. It's a formal qualification and a recognised qualification. Options, I suppose, are if you're at the stage of thinking, oh, I don't know, sounds like a good idea, but not sure yet. It may be that just yourself or perhaps you and another would like to train as a mediator, find out more about what that means, what the training looks like, and then think about bringing it in-house. You're welcome to do that by joining, obviously, one of our public programmes, and the next one's in June. Or if you wanted to go straight into an internal mediation scheme, what we can offer you is the training, but in-house. So you determine who's on it, obviously, the logistics around that, where we hold it. But we can make that particularly bespoke to your organisation in terms of the role plays that we use throughout the programme, some of the discussions that we have, so that it feels that it really addresses the sorts of issues that you and your organisation want to use it for. I could talk about this for a long time. I think if you're interested, Lisanne's just put a form, I think, in the chat, haven't you? Yeah. So the form's gone in the chat. If you would just like a chat with Lisanne or I, where we can talk through the options in more detail, talk about potential costs depending on how many people are involved, and just answer, any questions that you might have on a purely just having a chat, just want to talk about it basis, we'd be more than happy to do that for you. But now, we've still got a good 10 minutes, so over for questions.
So what I'm going to do is just stop recording,